Chelsea at night glowed like a promise no one dared to claim. The cobblestones were slick with mist. Black cars lined the curb like a herd of domesticated beasts, chauffeurs in suits standing by the doors, hands clasped before their bellies, eyes fixed on a pre-measured patch of darkness. The Sinclair's mansion didn't blare music. It whispered in light crystal chandeliers shedding rain, the hush of glass touching glass, that sound the upper class uses to certify one another. We are still here, still in control, still at ease. Maya stood before the mirror in the second-floor bedroom, spine drawn taut like a bow pulled to its limit. The wall sconces cupped her brown skin in warmth, making the ivory silk dress ivory, not too white, look like a safe convention. The hairstylist had left with her heavy black toolkit. Maya's hair was ironed straight, coiled neatly at the nape with a tiny pearl clip, so delicate it was almost invisible. Elegance is not drawing attention, Edward's assistant had said that afternoon, skimming Maya's lipsticks before choosing a pink so pale it was nearly invisible. Perfection is nothing extra. She touched her neck, where the diamond necklace lay cold as instruction. Edward had fastened the clasp, his grey eyes sliding over her face like a quality check. Perfect, he said always that word, for fabric, objects, and light, not for people. The perfects Maya had swallowed over 5 years had settled into pebbles in her stomach, rolling with a slight clatter every time she laughed. From downstairs came muted laughter, group footsteps, and the scent of white tea. A server knocked softly. "Miss, the guests have arrived." "Miss," Imani Clark called to say she'll be late due to traffic. The name brushed Maya like a regular heartbeat amid a tailored orchestra. Imani, her friend from the days of painting in the shared Brixton studio, the one who laughed loud and painted messy, the one who had never told her to take up less space. Since the wedding at Street Paul's, Maya had counted Imani by the few times they could sit together and call the things no one wanted named by their proper names. The door opened. Edward entered like an addendum. He wasn't the sort of man who suffocated with noise. He suffocated with calculation. Black suit, black tie, white shirt, a simple steel-faced watch that anyone in the know would recognize as enough money to buy a small suburban house. He touched the necklace at her throat, not a caress, an adjustment, so it caught the light properly. "Everything's ready," he said, eyes not meeting hers but studying their reflection. "Claudia will be a few minutes late. Your parents won't be coming, correct?" "Yes," Maya answered, voice soft from rehearsal. "They don't fit nights like this." Edward nodded, light as signing off on a minor expense. "I've prepared my remarks. When we get to the thank yous, we'll talk about your scholarship fund, call it the Community Arts Fund, and remember not to mention Brixton. They like hearing Chelsea funds the arts, not that the story begins over there." Over there, a velvet-lined blank. To Edward, Brixton belonged in a glossy magazine's rows from hardship feature, not in the middle of one's sitting room. Maya set her hand on the chair arm. Nude, polished nails left no trace. "My fund is for the kids in Brixton," she said, weighing each word. "I want to use its real name, the place that raised me." Edward offered his most professional smile. "We can do that more suitably, in a more suitable venue. Tonight is about you, about us, about standards." He stepped closer. His cologne was the smell of 4 walls. "And you look perfect." She nodded, no other word left, and went down the spiral stairs with him. Below, Chelsea unhinged its jaw and swallowed them. The great room, hung with paintings, mostly abstracts, bought at auctions. Maya wasn't invited to through gold through crystal. People passed through each other with draining glasses, pausing 3 minutes at each cluster to trade the same sentence structure. "We must get together soon, absolutely wonderful." On the grand piano by the window to the garden, a guest musician played jazz as light as a touch that never lands. "Happy birthday, Maya," someone called, and every gaze swiveled toward her, attention as choreographed as lighting cues. Maya smiled. The smile had been rehearsed. Lashes arched, teeth shone just enough, the corners lifted to a 15-degree angle. She moved through the crowd like driving through an orderly parade. The women measured her with their eyes. Which designer, hair, and figure? The men looked with the familiar gaze. Possession. Edward is fortunate, someone murmured to someone else as if she couldn't hear. She sipped champagne. The faint bitter spread over her tongue like a reminder. Silence is a skill too. "Tonight is yours," Edward said softly in her ear, his hand on her lower back like a red stamp on a paper. She thought of nights that had been hers, the smell of turpentine flooding the rented room, cobalt blue clinging to her nails, Imani's peal of laughter at a rogue brushstroke looking like a sun someone flicked. Tonight, she didn't smell turpentine. She smelled white tea. Edward's brother, Thomas Sinclair, stood near the long table of chilled oysters, holding a scotch like an alibi. His eyes flicked to his sister-in-law, then to the door as if afraid of what might enter. Thomas drank faster than he spoke. He was the only one in the family who asked Maya, "Do you still paint?" and then flustered when she answered, "Sometimes." At 3 a.m., Maya. A warm voice tore through the velvet of rules. Imani appeared with a folded umbrella in hand, face radiant in a way that doesn't ask the room's permission. Her cheap wool coat was wet with rain, clinging to her shoulders like evidence. Maya hugged her and felt the necklace colder against her neck. "Sorry, traffic," Imani whispered, then stepped back to look Maya up and down. "You look pretty, the way they want, but you're still you, right?" The question fell to the floor. No one picked it up. Edward approached, smiling at a gracious host. "Imani, so glad you made it. Make yourself at home, the food's that way, the bar to the right. We'll have a short speech after the first course." "A speech?" "Of course," Imani said, her eyes dimming half a beat. She turned to Maya and lowered her voice. "Tonight, do what you need. Do what you need." That sentence had been in Maya's clutch all day, alongside a slim cream envelope, the paper of another city, German letters aligned like rows of trees. She had opened it 3 times and closed it 3 times. 3 times her heart had slammed the ribcage as if demanding a room of its own. Right then the door opened. The air in the room acquired a personality. Claudia Marlowe entered like a magazine cover, deciding to revisit a special issue. Red, not the elegant burgundy, but the red of blood seen through crystal. Blonde hair braided low, lips the same color as the glossy, body-skimming dress. Claudia didn't look at Maya first. She looked at Edward, and her smile softened by half a degree, a private greeting. "Claudia," people said her name like a brand. "Claudia, you look stunning." "Claudia, how's the Zurich project?" The questions came like numbered arrows. Claudia moved through the crowd like someone who remembered her own floor plan. Near Maya, she bent to place an air kiss beside Maya's cheek. "Happy birthday, Maya. Oh, such a lovely age." Then to Edward, "You still remember my 28th, don't you?" The question stuck tacky in the air. "We don't live on nostalgia," Edward said, light enough to sound like teasing. "Cute," Claudia replied, her gaze returning to Maya like a temporary compass. "You're different tonight. The kind of difference that disappears if you don't look closely." She smiled and moved on, leaving an expensive scent like a marginal note in an orchestral score. Maya breathed in deliberately. In her clutch, the envelope rasped against the leather wallet. The joints of her fingers twitched, like before laying down the first layer of paint on unprimed canvas. Imani stood beside her. No need to ask. She set a hand lightly at Maya's back, a reverse possession. Possession as encouragement. The night lengthened on smooth key changes. The same stories traded new narrators. The same compliments found new recipients. A silver-haired investor asked Maya with genial interest, "Do you still keep a hand in the arts? I heard you used to." He didn't say Brixton. No one said Brixton except those who knew they were telling the truth. Maya smiled properly and answered, "A little." He nodded, satisfied with a little, and moved on, leaving a wake of perfect cigar. In a corner, Thomas poured more whiskey. He saw Maya looking and lifted his glass, like a helpless apology. Far off, the band slid into a jazz number with too much space enough for a memory to slip in and skid out of control. Maya heard the squeak of the old dolly in the Brixton studio rolling across concrete, heard Imani singing a soul tune off-key while painting, listened to her own pen scratching on tracing paper, leaving scraps of sound only the hand that held it could listen to. "It's time," Edward said, his hand returning to her back. "I'll speak first. You need to thank them." Gently. He looked at her lips, checking the lipstick, at the dress, checking the seams, at her, checking an object before it goes on the shelf. Maya nodded. She looked around. These people had eaten at her table, drunk from her glasses, talked about diversity like an ethical garnish. They protected the walls with smiles and praised the windows for letting in light at the approved angle. Maya straightened a fraction more. In her clutch, the envelope rubbed the wallet again, a bird beating its wings, harder each time. Edward stepped onto the low riser set in the middle of the room, not a high stage, just a lip to bring things to eye level. He tapped his glass. The tings were as fine as frost flowers shattering. The room held a pose. Glasses in hand, faces lifted, standard smiles, timely nods. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate," Edward began, planting his ego like a flag. "Tonight we're celebrating a remarkable woman, Maya, who has brought peace and beauty to this home." A few polite claps. "We're also celebrating new plans. Maya's Arts Fund, supporting creative work in central London neighbourhoods." He skimmed past Brixton like a blade skimming a fish tendon, no cut, but aware there's something there. Maya saw Imani's brief frown. She also saw Claudia, head tilted a degree, lips pressed as if stifling a smile. Behind them, Thomas leaned on the table, eyes on the floor, lips moving a sentence that never made a sound. "And," Edward said, raising his glass, "with all my love, I wish you, Maya, a happy birthday. You are my calm center." He turned to her and touched his glass to hers like a perfect slow-motion shot. "Would you like to say a few words?" The whole room faced Maya like sunflowers. This moment had been storyboarded. She would thank them, tell a small story about opportunity, name a few people in the correct order, and end with a smile of just the proper depth. Applause, upbeat music, and dessert trays would arrive. The night would roll on its track, without a millimeter's drift. Maya set down her glass. Her hand brushed her clutch. A tiny movement, and a whole forest opened. Imani across a swath of people leaned forward, eyes tracking not out of curiosity but out of trust. Thomas straightened. Claudia's mouth curled a shade higher, a smile of someone catching blood in the water. Maya stood tall and stepped onto the low riser. The carpet was thick underfoot, the kind that makes the fallen soundless. She looked around, mirrors reflecting other mirrors, making the room larger than the truth. Crystal hurled light into white knives. On the east wall where Edward had hung an abstract he called on trend, Maya saw her face fractured into nameless planes. "Thank you, everyone," she began, her voice not loud but clear. "Thank you for coming to witness." The word witness fell into people's hands like a tool they didn't know how to use. "Thank you to this house for teaching me how loud silence can be." A few raised brows. Edward stood beside her, the corner of his mouth still in place. Only the hand at her back tightened half a beat, a reminder made of skin. Maya inhaled. Beneath white tea and wine, she still caught a whiff of turpentine. She thought of the Brixton room, the cheap desk lamp, rain slapping the window, and the miracle when cobalt met Naples yellow on canvas. A new blue she didn't name, only knew it was hers. She thought, too, of the time she had been told softer, "Don't be so sharp. Don't wear your hair like that. It looks wild." Words always swaddled in, "Don't take this the wrong way, and I only want what's best." She looked into Edward's grey eyes, eyes that had memorized the price of everything except a person. She looked past him and caught Imani's black eyes, eyes that didn't appraise, only registered. She slipped her hand into her clutch and heard the envelope's paper whisper against silk. She asked herself the most straightforward question she'd forgotten for too long. Which language will I speak tonight? The one they understand, or I was born to speak? The band stopped on cue, like a little girl holding her breath too long and letting it go. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet if someone tried. The chandelier trembled, or was that her hand? Maya didn't know, but she knew this. When a painter lays the first layer, the painting already knows what it will become even if the painter doesn't. "Maybe," she said, voice steady as a brush. Hand, it's time I used my own voice. Edward's hand at her back stiffened, not violence, just power testing for give. "And I have something to announce." The sentence split the air. Heads tipped forward a fraction with the hunter's reflex. Claudia lifted her chin, eyes lighting like someone betting on the right horse. Thomas briefly looked at the ceiling, then tucked his glass behind his back to keep something from breaking. Imani nodded slightly as though laying a hand on Maya's shoulder from across the room. Maya released her grip on the riser's chair back and stood straighter, the soles of her feet feeling the carpet like a gentle shoreline before the plunge. She realized her heart wasn't beating faster. It was finally beating true at the tempo of someone returning to herself. "Thank you for celebrating," she said, sweeping the faces that lived in reflections. "But I think birthdays are when you count how many parts of yourself you still own." She smiled, not the rehearsed curve, but something drawn deeper down, where she kept the colors unblended. "And tonight, I'd like to answer that with something straightforward." Edward tilted his head, stretching his smile another half-inch, an effort to keep the story inside its frame. "Darling, perhaps we could—" Maya didn't look at him. She looked at the room, the building that had swallowed her laughter for years, and said silently, "Return it." Then she reached into her clutch, touched the edge of the envelope, felt the paper cold as the Thames at dawn. In that instant, she saw all that would shift if she pulled it out, the murmur turning to whisper, turning to a quiet blast. Relationships moored by money pitching, the hushed talk of women and propriety falling like hail. She breathed in. Not to summon courage. Courage had lived in her since the days before white canvas, but to bid farewell to a language. She tugged the flap, and right then the chandelier shivered, as if someone in the next room had shut a door too hard. The tremor was as slight as glass on glass, a pocket-sized preview of a larger collision. Outside, the Chelsea garden glittered with fine rain, metal dust thin, stippling the pond into chasing concentric rings. "Darling," Edward began, "just loud enough for two." Maya looked straight at him, not angry, lucid. "Wait for me to speak," she murmured, then turned to the room, lifted the microphone light as a paintbrush, but capable of amplifying every deviation. She let the envelope slip from her clutch like a tired bird that had found the eaves. The cream paper caught the light, drawing a straight line in the air. The room leaned forward in unison. Phones stirred awake in pockets. Words forming would begin. "You won't believe what happened tonight." Claudia angled her face and smiled like someone hitting her favorite note. Imani held her breath exactly one beat, then breathed again, slow and even, like a midwife beside a birth. "What I want to announce," Maya said, her voice slicing through layers of velvet, is— The room went quiet, as if everyone had swallowed the air at once. Somewhere, a faint clink of crystal sounded like breathing. Maya lifted the envelope, her hand steadier than when she held a brush. "I've been accepted into an international art program in Berlin," she said. The final syllable of Berlin falling into the thick carpet like a drop of deep blue ink into a glass of clear water. 6 months. Starting next month. For a moment, no one knew what to do with the information. Champagne flutes hung suspended, smiles froze, faces, bright beneath electric light, dimmed as if a painting had been varnished too heavily. Edward touched her back again. But this time, instead of bolstering or soothing, his hand tightened, like a small pair of pliers testing metal for tensile strength. He tilted his face, speaking low into her ear. "What do you think you're doing?" Maya didn't turn. She looked straight at the crowd, every gaze pinned to her as if she'd bent the only straight line they believed in. In the corner, Claudia's mouth tipped up the smile of someone who has just watched a small explosion light the whole room. "I applied 2 years ago," Maya said, voice even and precise. "Back then I thought I might forget this dream, but they didn't forget me, and I remembered myself." A small laugh, not Maya's, popped out and was stifled. A silver-haired investor covered a cough to mask his discomfort. From across the room, Imani touched 2 fingers together, a gesture like a signal. "You did it." Maya dipped her chin a fraction, knowing she had just laid the first patch of color on a new canvas. Edward turned to the crowd, smile straining to hold its shape. "A little joke from my wife," he said, voice as calm as someone smoothing over a technical glitch. "She's always had a sense of humor." "It's not a joke," Maya cut in, her voice covering his for the first time in 5 years. "I've decided. I'm going." The sound in the room slipped off its beat. A few guests glanced at each other to confirm. "Did we hear that right?" Thomas set his glass down, eyes wide like a man watching a play whose lines have suddenly changed. Claudia clapped slowly, 3 crisp slaps in the hush. "Wonderful," she said, eyes spearing Edward. "Seems not everyone's on your control list." The line fell like a stone. A few people inhaled, a few sipped their drinks to avoid speaking. Edward squeezed harder. "That's enough," he hissed under his breath. "We'll discuss this later." Maya turned her face to him, gaze unflinching. "There is no later. This is the discussion." The reply made those nearest stop breathing. They witnessed a rare mask cracking at the party its owner had staged. Edward let go and stepped half a pace forward, as if to seize the narrative back. But Maya had already occupied the space. She raised the envelope higher so everyone could see the bright red seal of the Berlin Academy of Arts. "I used to think," she said, voice light but each word dropping like metal, "that happiness was being with a powerful man, wearing the dress he chose, smiling just enough, keeping quiet at the right times. But that's living inside someone else's painting. I want to return to my own canvas." A small O fluttered from the crowd, uncertain whether in shock or agreement. Imani moved closer, her eyes bright as headlights fixed on Maya. Thomas edged in too, the glass trembling in his hand. Claudia folded her arms, smiling widely as if relishing good theatre. Edward's colour changed, red, then pale, then red again like waves breaking on rock. He spoke loud enough for all to hear. "You applied without consulting me. Who do you think you are, making a decision like that and cutting your husband out?" A rustle of whispers rose. A few women arched brows. Some men frowned not in dissent, but at the inconvenience. Maya pressed her lips together. Then she released a sentence that surprised even her with its composure. "I am myself, Edward. Not an item in your collection." A silence heavier than the music that had just stopped. Claudia broke it with a little laugh. "Oh my, Edward Sinclair, the first asset you've ever let slip. About time." Edward snapped around, eyes sparking. "Shut up, Claudia." "No," Maya interjected, voice higher. "Let her speak. Because what she just said is true. You've never seen me, Maya. You've only seen Mrs. Sinclair, the woman who makes you look good to the world." The whispering now spread through the room like ink bleeding across paper. People pulled out phones. A few cameras began to blink. Imani stepped forward, but Maya lifted a hand to hold her back. "It's okay," she murmured. "Let me say it." Edward raised both hands as if to contain a blaze. "We'll talk at home. This isn't the place." "No," Maya repeated. "This place, this night." She swept the room with her gaze, from familiar faces to those she knew only by name. "I've been dying here by degrees. This wine, these lights. Every dinner, each one a handful of earth thrown over me. The good news is, I'm still here, and I choose to live." A smatter of applause, small, from a shadowed corner. Then it faded out of fear, but it was enough. Maya exhaled, her smile widened, unedited. "Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Edward, because tonight you finally gave me a reason to go." The sentence cut clean, leaving the room suspended. No one knew whether to drink, clap, or pretend they'd heard nothing. Only Claudia clapped again, loud and slow, each beat like a nail driven into the wall. Edward looked around and understood that the golden cage had cracked. He reached out as if to pull Maya back, but she had already stepped down from the riser, the envelope in her hand like the first flag planted on new ground. Imani came to stand beside her. Thomas bowed his head, saying nothing, as if admitting defeat. The room, still gleaming, still glittering, had been altered all the same, and at its center, Maya knew, this was only the beginning. The crystal lights quivered, as if the room had to readjust its breathing to what had just happened. A slight sound, perhaps a silver spoon touching a rim, rang and died. Everyone stood there, each person a frozen exclamation point. Edward stepped forward halfway, then stopped, like a man trying to remember his place in a painting someone had suddenly turned upside down. He raised both hands, palms in, a pacifying gesture, The reflex of someone who assumes smoothing things over is his natural right. "Maya," he said, just loud enough for the first few rows. "You're emotional. I understand. I'm not emotional," Maya replied, unblinking. "I'm clearer than I've ever been." A camera flashed from a corner where a young woman, merely a friend of a friend, had lifted her phone by the instinct of her generation. She didn't know what she was recording. She only felt a strange energy that people later called a battle line. Imani leaned in, as if to place an invisible hand on Maya's back. Thomas edged half a step away, his scotch lowered to thigh level. Claudia tilted her chin, a self-satisfied curve on her lips, but somewhere in her eyes lay something like surprise. Maya wasn't shaking. Edward stopped smiling. The expression he used to plaster over every hairline crack at a social table slipped from his face like a mask whose glue had failed. His voice changed lower, colder, more familiar to Maya, the voice he used in meetings when someone dared to ask a question. "Enough," he said. "You're making yourself ridiculous." Maya looked straight at him, as at a line drawn wrong on canvas that she had once agreed to live with. "I've made myself ridiculous for 5 years, Edward. Tonight, I'm only making myself free." A soft hiss. A middle-aged woman's hand went to the pearls at her throat, unconsciously. The man beside her glanced around for an allied gaze. Most people avoided eye contact, as if meeting eyes would summon them to the stand as witnesses. Edward looked around the room, a tactical habit, and saw smartphones blinking like fireflies in the dark. Anger, shame, and an instinct to control tangled in his throat. "Put the phones away," he said, clipped. "This is private." A young female voice called from behind. Not private anymore. Then silence, as if she herself was startled by her boldness. Imani chuckled under her breath, very softly. Claudia arched an eyebrow, entertained. Thomas exhaled hard, his eyes glued to the floor as if apologizing to someone. Edward turned back to Maya, where his anger found the nearest target. "You're ruining everything," he said, each word set down like a weight. "Everything we built, everything I prepared for tonight. You owe me respect." Maya shook her head slowly, like someone wiping dust from a mirror. "Respect isn't silence, it's seeing. And you've never seen me." The moment stretched, thinned like pulled sugar, on the verge of snapping. Someone breathed too fast. The band, unsure what to do with their hands, set down a few loose notes, as if asking leave to vanish. Claudia decided to push the play a little further. She strode a few steps, stopping close enough that her perfume mingled with the room's white tea. "Edward," she said, voice clear as crystal, "this is what happens when you mistake the woman beside you for furniture." They unexpectedly changed position. She turned to Maya. "Congratulations, darling. You finally stood on the table instead of being set on it." The line struck like a match against the room's volatile air, a flicker of laughs, a chorus of fierce shush. Edward clenched his jaw. "Claudia, enough." "Oh, I forgot," Claudia said. "You're the one who decides when enough, Island." The final latch inside Edward sprang loose. Not because of Claudia, not because of the crowd, but because, for the first time, he felt powerless before Maya, the woman he'd thought was fully configured, like a customizable app. He moved a step closer. The hand that had long stamped power at Maya's back jerked up, hovering in midair like a command that could no longer find an operating system to run on. "I said," he hissed through his teeth, "enough," and the hand came down. The sound wasn't loud. The thick carpet swallowed too many things, but the meeting of skin and skin carried clearer than all else. A dry, compact rip, like a felt tip slicing across a written word. Maya's head tipped half an inch. On her left cheek, heat flared the first line of fire on a blank canvas. The room was crowded, and suddenly as empty as a station abandoned after the last train. Every other noise had been pulled out, leaving silence in the middle, hulking and homeless. Imani lunged reflexively, but Maya raised a hand not to block, to ask for a second. Claudia opened her mouth, perhaps to deliver something cutting, then closed it. For the first time, she looked genuinely at a loss. Thomas dropped his scotch. The glass didn't shatter thanks to the carpet, but whiskey sloshed out, leaving a sour, boozy smell. A server covered his mouth, eyes wide. In the corner, the girl with the phone lifted her fingers to her neck without thinking. She seemed to hear her own heartbeat. Edward stared at his hand like an alien object falling from the ceiling. His grey eyes, the measure he used for the world, contracted, not with instant remorse, but with horror that something had crossed from never into just happened. He backed half a step, as if he could retrieve his hand by dragging time a second backwards. Maya touched her cheek, not rubbing, only laying a fingertip there like a painter testing the surface of paint that's just set. The heat spoke to her in an ancient language women passed down through generations. This is the line. It didn't scream. It simply made itself apparent. She lowered her hand, and then what no one in that room was prepared to face, she laughed. Not the manic laughter of melodrama, not the snide laugh of social media. It was a round, full sound, coming from somewhere between her ribcage and spine, where people keep their proper names. It began as a light tremor, then opened warm and deep, spilling over her lips like water after a prolonged rain. It didn't ask the room's permission. It didn't ask hers. It simply had the right. An older woman in the second row raised a hand to her mouth as tears pricked. She didn't know why that laugh made her want to cry. A young man there to network felt a chill along his back, not from violence, but from the rupture of a structure he'd thought was natural. Imani burst into tears, but the kind with a smile, the kind you cry when someone you love comes home. Claudia stood still. Her smile blew out like a candle. She had never imagined a power that needed no poison. Edward didn't know where to rest his eyes. The laugh wasn't at him that, more than anything, unbalanced him. It went through him, through the room, through the perfect years, and opened a door he'd never entered. The place Maya owned, sufficed, was free. When the laughter ebbed, Maya spoke, not loud but carrying far, like a church bell before the city wakes. "Thank you." 2 syllables tilted the air. Someone repeated them silently, unable to fathom why the struck woman was giving thanks. "Thank you for telling the truth," Maya went on, looking at Edward like a stranger with a familiar face. "Not with words, but with an act. Thank you for showing me what I knew and kept doubting. I'm not a person here. I'm displaying." She turned to the crowd, her gaze skimming faces, not accusing, not pleading, as if holding up a mirror for them to look into. "And thank you all for witnessing. Without you, the performance wouldn't be complete." A grunt came from somewhere, half shame, half awakening. Imani stepped to Maya's side, not touching, but shielding. Thomas moved closer, his lips trembling. I'm sorry," words dropping, unable to join into a sentence. Claudia backed half a step, leaving center stage for the first time. Maya adjusted her hair clip, a slight movement, commanding. "I'm leaving, Edward," she said, returning to him, her voice returning to calm. "Not because of the slap, that's only a period. I'm leaving because I won't be your sentence anymore." She picked up her bag, gripped the Berlin envelope, and glanced at Imani. "Let's go." Panic flickered in Edward, not fear of losing his wife in that moment, but of being pushed off the track of the story. He reached out the same hand that had made the rip, as if to tape torn paper back together. "Maya," she lifted her head one look, gentle and absolute. "Don't say my name like calling a pet back to the rug, Edward. I'm not coming back." Claudia tried to gather the dregs of her power. So theatrical, she said, the curve of her mouth, for the last time. "Good luck in Berlin. I hope they have enough mirrors for you." Maya smiled at Claudia, as one smiles at a statue, trying to imitate the living. "In Berlin, people look at paintings," she replied. "Not at each other to measure rank." Then she walked. The room split like the sea. Silk skirts hissed, tuxedos shifted half a beat, all to make a path just wide enough for one woman to pass without dodging. Imani matched her step. Thomas moved aside, eyes wet. A flustered waiter opened the door. Chelsea's night air poured in, smelling of rain and the road. On the threshold, Maya paused and looked back, once not as someone clinging, but as a painter snapping a reference before closing a sketchbook. The crystal lights were still beautiful, the whispers refined, the champagne still glittering. But now a new wash lay over everything, the color of truth, the kind no lighting can dim. "Oh," she said, as if remembering, "my birthday present." She didn't look at Edward. She looked at Claudia, then past Claudia, to the long line of people who had helped keep the cage polished. You can keep the house, the paintings, everything that defined me in your dictionaries. I'm keeping myself. She touched her cheek, where the heat had cooled, and smiled. And I'm keeping this laugh. You won't hear it again in this room. She crossed the threshold. Night wind met her face, cold and real. Imani tugged her hand, and the two ran down the dew-slick stone steps like schoolgirls slipping out of a boring assembly. A driver called, "Taxi." Imani shook her head, and they fell into the narrow side lane, heels tapping on stone like writing a new poem. Behind them, the door whispered shut like a secret. Inside, the noise crept back, altered as if every story now had to search for new words. Edward still stood there, hands at his sides, staring into the space Maya had left. On the carpet, a dark, curved stain of scotch, like a stubborn pen stroke on a drawing that won't erase. Claudia adjusted her dress and smiled at someone, but the smile took no spark. Thomas bent to pick up the empty glass, his hand shaking, and set it on a waiter's tray. The band exchanged looks. The pianist tested a few notes and stopped. No melody felt appropriate after a laugh like that. Outside, the rain was wonderful. Maya and Imani paused under an awning and breathed. Maya laughed again, smaller this time, private as if relearning an old word missing from the family lexicon. Imani laughed too, tears and rain indistinguishable. "You okay?" Imani asked the most straightforward question. "The dearest." Maya touched the Berlin envelope, the paper softened by her warmth. "Okay," she said, for the first time in a long while. A night bus rumbled past, smelling of oil, people, and lives that don't need crystal to shine. Maya saw her hazy reflection in the bus window, a woman standing straight, hair pinned neat but with a forest of free curls in her eyes. She lifted her hand and drew an invisible line in the air, the first stroke of a new painting. Behind them, in the Gilded room, conversation would soon resume. Explanations would bloom like fake flowers. They would tell the story in ways that bruised as little as possible. They would say, unfortunate, drunk, stress, a momentary lapse, any phrase to avoid violence and power. But somewhere, a young woman would keep the clip not to smear, but to remember that a laugh saves a life some nights. Maya pulled up the zipper on the coat Imani had draped over her shoulders. "Let's go," she said. "Home." "Which home?" Imani asked, half joking, half earnest. "The one that's waiting," Maya said, "where light isn't something to be controlled." They left Chelsea and stepped into the wet ribbon of street, where small windows dotted the dark with cat-yellow glow. London breathed evenly, indifferent to the small empires collapsing inside it. Above, the thin clouds skated aside, revealing a shard of silver moon. Maya remembered a night in the old studio when she and Imani mixed paint by moonlight through a broken pane. Tonight, the moon was the same, only she had changed. She squeezed the envelope and felt her heartbeat through the paper. The taste of laughter lingered in her mouth like a good wine that doesn't need a label. She knew that when she closed her eyes tonight, she would hear that dry rip again, not to hurt, but to remember she had not chosen pain. She had chosen to laugh, and the door inside her, long wedged shut by high-end furniture, had swung open. At the far end of the street, the light changed from red to green, smooth as a decision coming ripe. Maya and Imani crossed, their heels placing free punctuation marks on the damp stone. The old story had dropped its curtain. The new painting awaited its second layer. The morning after the party, the Chelsea mansion was so silent that Edward could only hear his blood drumming in his ears. He opened his eyes to a room dimmed by heavy curtains not yet drawn. The wide bed was still there, the sheets smooth, but the space beside him was cold as a stone slab. Maya was gone. He sat up, head weighted as if he'd drained a lake of whiskey. But what weighed him down wasn't alcohol. It was the emptiness swelling, filling every seam of the house. He looked around the room. The diamond necklace lay on the bedside table, not in its velvet box, but stripped off in haste, like a snake's shed skin left behind. He stood. His feet sank into the thick wool carpet Maya had once wanted to replace with pale wood, so the room could breathe. He'd refused, saying wood was hard to clean. Now the silence reverberated from the carpet, heavy as the sea floor. On the desk sat another envelope, Maya's slanted, looping hand. He knew it at once. It was what he had once called classic before advising her to type things for convenience. He opened the letter. "Edward, I've arranged everything. The movers will come at noon. Please don't be home then, let it happen gently. I've left a journal on your desk. Not to hold you back, only to be understood. You're not cruel, just absent. But absence is a kind of blade. Maya," he lowered the page and drew a long breath. "Absent. A small word, and sharper than any report he'd ever read." He walked to the study. On the desk, a brown leather notebook lay quiet. He'd given it to Maya their first year, inscribed, "To write your dreams." He hadn't thought she'd use it. But the cover was worn. The edges curled, the proof of 5 silent years he had never heard. He opened to the first page. "Year 1. You said, 'I laugh too loudly.' I practiced laughing more softly. 'Marriage is an adjustment,' I told myself." He flipped ahead. "Year 2. You said the opening ran too late, so I stayed home to make dinner with you. I told myself, 'Art can wait.'" Another page. "Year 3. I get up at 3 a.m. to paint. Only then can I hear my own voice. The dawn is gold, but you sleep. That could be for the best." Another. "Year 4. Claudia came for lunch. She talked about trips, about paintings she once made. Did you make her give up painting too, or am I especially reduced?" He stopped, his hand shaking. The last entry, written just the day before the party. "The Berlin Academy has sent an acceptance. My old professor wrote, 'There is a hunger in your work, something that could redefine the contemporary.' I laughed until I cried, then cried until I had no breath left. I will tell you tonight. Either you will finally see me, or I will finally see you. Either way, I will be free." Edward set the journal down as if it were on fire. The room tilted around him. The expensive pieces, the Italian leather chairs, the ruler-straight shelves all looked cheap. Because they were empty, the house had lost its core, the woman who made it a home, though he himself had turned her into a shadow. The doorbell rang. He went down the marble staircase, the one Maya had wanted carpeted to make it warmer. He'd refused, saying polished stone befitted the Sinclairs. Now each step answered him, echoing hollow as the corridor of a museum stripped of its statues. When he opened the door, he found Samuel and Evelyn, Clark Maya's parents. Samuel was tall, broad-shouldered, with stern black eyes. Evelyn's silver hair was coiled neatly. Her gaze was calm but cold. They didn't need many words, their presence was indictment enough. "We're here for our daughter's things," Samuel said, his voice heavy as metal. "The movers," Will Edward began. "No movers," Evelyn cut in, the first time she had interrupted him in 5 years. "This is family business." They came in, crossing the expansive foyer, looking around as if walking through a museum about to be deinstalled. Canvases swaddled in white, fine objects standing still. Evelyn pulled the cloth from a frame, one of Maya's, a riot of color, and sighed. "She painted it the night before the wedding," she said. "She wanted to show you. But you had a call with Tokyo." Edward remembered. A rushed deal. He had told himself, "She'll understand." But now, standing before the blazing painting, he saw only himself in the dark. Samuel and Evelyn gathered the canvases and personal things, her grandmother's sewing box, a few small cacti Maya kept on the kitchen sill, and some old books. The bits he'd once thought trivial now weighed like stone. As they were about to leave, Thomas appeared in the doorway, hair askew, and the smell of drink was not yet gone. He took in the scene, then looked at Edward. "God," Thomas whispered, "you've become Dad." Edward froze. In Thomas's mouth, Dad was not genealogy, it was a curse. They both knew William Sinclair had died at his desk, face down in a file, leaving behind a lifetime of assets and a lifetime of broken women. "Where is she?" Edward asked, almost pleading. Thomas shook his head. "Somewhere. You can't find with money." Samuel paused on the threshold, a box of paintings in his arms. He looked straight at Edward, his voice not bitter, only sad. "My daughter waited for you to see her. You never did. Last night, when she laughed, that wasn't pain. That was recognition. She recognized that you collect, you don't love." They left, and the house was empty, not of things, but of soul. Edward stood in the hall while the cold, thin morning light filtered through the glass. He looked up at the crystal chandelier still glittering, and now he saw it. It didn't shine. It reflected like he did, living only on borrowed light. On the pillow lay Maya's wedding ring. She'd placed it neatly, not flung, not hidden, set down like a period, tidy, courteous, absolute. Edward sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the ring. His fingers trembled. Last night, he lost his temper and delivered a slap, and in return received a laugh that would haunt him all his life. Now the gilded house had become a mausoleum. He listened. The house answered with silence. Chelsea's night had ended with black cars gliding away in sequence. But the morning opened somewhere else entirely. Brixton. The neighborhood woke with the cries of market vendors hawking fruit and greens, the scorched smell of coffee from a corner shop, the pulse of reggae leaking from a speaker held together by twisted wires. Brick walls carried layers of graffiti, colors bleeding like stories shouted, painted over, then shouted again. Amid the chaos, there was freedom. Maya hauled her suitcase up the narrow stairs of a 3-story building. Imani opened the door, face glowing, though her hair was messy and her t-shirt blotched with paint. "Come in. This is home now," she said, hugging her tight. The flat was small. The living room doubled as a studio. The sofa's fabric was torn, the bookshelf tilted, the wooden table stained with rings of water. But the window looked out onto a street alive with people. The air carried turpentine and acrylic, not a luxury fragrance, but the scent of life. Maya dropped onto the sofa. Last night's laughter resonated in her head, warm, real. On her left cheek, the heat had cooled, yet it lingered as a gentle reminder. Never cross that threshold again. "Tea or coffee?" Imani asked, moving about the cramped kitchen. "Coffee. Cheap is fine." "Only cheap here," Imani grinned, setting down a chipped mug. Maya cradled it, the warmth trembling in her palms. "He'll be furious," she said, not complaining, but stating. "Let him," Imani replied. "That man lived in control. Now he has nothing left to control, but you do, yourself." Maya smiled. Simple, clear, a sentence she would have dismissed 5 years ago as naive, yet it turned out to be true. She rose and walked to the old easel Imani had prepared. "Can I borrow some paint?" Imani handed over the acrylic box, which was still splattered. "Canvas, too. He banned you from painting at home, right?" "Yes." He turned the studio into a gym. Maya opened a jar of cobalt blue, inhaling deeply. The smell struck memory raw. So many nights she had painted in secret at 3 a.m., hiding canvases before dawn, scrubbing color off her fingers so no one would notice. She laid down the first stroke, a curve of blue, awkward but free. Imani watched and murmured, "You're alive again." That afternoon, social media detonated. A short clip, 45 seconds, captured Edward's slap and the laughter that followed. No one knew who had posted it, but it spread faster than any news broadcast. Caption: "That laugh saved her." Thousands of comments flooded in. Outrage, admiration, recognition. One woman wrote, "I was silent for 10 years. Tonight, I laughed with her." Maya sat on the sofa as her phone buzzed endlessly. Imani tossed down an early newspaper. Its front page already. Maya saw her face caught mid-laughter, eyes blazing, mouth open. The paper called it the laugh of liberation. She put the phone aside and turned back to the canvas. "Let them talk. I want to paint." That night, she painted until dawn. Brushstrokes poured like a dam released. She painted a woman laughing, birds flying from her mouth into the sky. She titled it, Day 1. 3 days later, a call came. A woman's voice introduced herself as a small Shoreditch gallery owner, Vivian Cross. "I saw the video. I also saw a few of your older works online. We need to meet." They arranged to see each other at a shabby cafe, wooden chairs worn smooth. Vivian wore a wide-brim hat, her eyes bright as if she'd spotted gold in the mud. "Your story isn't just tragedy. It's a manifesto. If you agree, I want to mount a fast show called The Laugh." Maya was silent for a moment, staring at the cappuccino before her. "I don't want to be sensationalized." "No, we'll tell it your way. The paintings will speak, not the tabloids. Maya lifted her eyes. For the first time in years, she heard an invitation without conditions. All right. But I decide what hangs, what doesn't. Vivian smiled and extended her hand. Deal. That evening, Maya returned to the flat and told Imani everything. They opened a cheap wine and sat on the floor. Imani raised her glass. To laughter becoming an exhibition, Maya touched hers to it. To life returning. She leaned back, gazing at the ceiling with its peeling paint. For the first time, the future felt not like a trap, but a blank canvas. Brixton's night hummed with distant rap, with vendors' voices from the late market. Maya opened the window, breathing the cold air. On the street below, girls in oversized jackets ran laughing. A boy cycled past blasting music. Life here needed no crystal, no velvet. It was raw, but true. She smiled, whispering, "Home." Shoreditch greeted the afternoon with a low grey sky, brick walls webbed with posters, and the smell of hurried coffee braided with fresh paint. Vivian Cross's gallery hid behind an old roll-up door, a small tilted sign. Cross divided by contemporary. Inside, white spotlights sliced like scalpels, the wood floor held a soft sheen, and the freshly patched white walls were still damp. No ornate ceilings, no crystal, just clean space waiting to be filled by the story that had just burst from a woman's mouth. Maya came in through the back, fingers hooked on the rim of a wooden crate of canvases. Imani and two art handlers followed, each cradling a canvas like a child. Vivian stood in the center with a clipboard, eyes bright like a conductor counting off before the downbeat. "Start with day 1, Vivian said, tapping her pen. "Left of the entrance. From there, we go backwards, recount the long slide into disappearance, and then return to the present with the laugh. The journey needs an emotional architecture, not just a diary." Maya nodded. "Don't hang anything that only invites pity. I don't need pity. I need viewers to find their part in the story." Vivian smiled. "We're fluent in the same language." They began. Day 1. The first painting Maya made in Brixton opened with a laughing mouth releasing a flock of bluebirds, their wings formed from stray letters. "I am allowed." Next came 3 a.m. divided by light, a dark kitchen where dawn filters through a window onto a table, and a woman paints, quiet with fear. Studio Jim faced it. An easel morphs into a squat rack, the kettle into a protein shaker. In the corner where cobalt once bloomed, there's only a mirror casting the shadow of a man lifting weights, his face cropped out. "Dinner performance here," Imani pointed out, "so people have to face it before turning into the final sequence." The smiles gleamed like knives on a long table with a white cloth. Beneath the table sat a second woman, the same woman in the chair, knees hugged, hands clamped over her ears. Several hands rested on her knee at the edge of the frame in a gesture of comfort, hands painted grey, slick like plastic. At the end, the question hands holding the Berlin envelope, its edges glowing like a blade. Behind them, a man's phone screen, stock alerts lighting up like cold fireworks. And in the center, the axis of the whole room, the laugh. Maya opened the last crate. The painting was one size larger than the rest, framed in raw oak. When the wrapping came off, it was as if the room had gained a window onto the moment of the landslide. There was no striking hand at the center, the slap appeared only as a blurred, warped shadow at the edge. The painting's axis was a woman's face turned slightly off-center, mouth open in laughter, eyes wet with light, not tears of hurt but the glint of something unfastened. From her mouth exploded a band of color, cadmium yellow colliding with alizarin crimson, cobalt slamming into viridian, deep violets cradled by ultramarine. Stand long enough and small forms surfaced in the torrent. An open door, a ring set on a pillow, a cactus, an envelope marked Berlin, and a slanted streak of blue like the trace of a life once blocked, now clearing the fence. Imani exhaled. "I was afraid it wouldn't match what I'd seen in my head," she said. "But it's more." "No price," Maya said. "Label it, not for sale from the start." Vivian nodded crisply. "It's the spine. You can't sell a spine." News of the show spread like the smell of fresh bread. "This is because the video became the hashtag The Laugh," and how Vivian framed it online. A journey that turns pain into aesthetic structure. Art sites ran early notes. A few celebrities quietly texted managers for the VIP list. Collectors scented opportunity but also risk. This was a story that wouldn't let them stand outside it. Opening day, the line curled from the pavement deep into the alley. Young women in white sneakers, mothers with babies, queer couples hand in hand, a few suited men awkward with their top buttons undone. An elderly woman in a sea blue beanie told her granddaughter, "Take me to see the laugh." Vivian ping-ponged between the door, the tiny bar, and the catalogue table. She whispered to Maya before the doors, "Remember, no long interviews today. The paintings talk. You give the opening line." Maya wore deep red, a clay-warm red, not crystal red. Her hair was braided high, threaded with a thin gold yarn. She stood in the center like stillness at a cyclone's core. "We begin," Vivian murmured. The door opened. The crowd flowed in, naturally, like water seeking a slope. A little boy stopped at Studio Jim. "Why did they take her room?" he asked his mother. She paused, then said, "Because someone thought strength mattered more than dreams." A cluster of art students whispered at dinner performance, "I've played that role at a boyfriend's table." A man in his 50s, tie loosened, lingered before the question, worrying the edge of his catalogue until it wrinkled. At the center, they met the laugh. No one passed it without slowing. Some looked up and breathed hard. Some raised a hand to their mouths. Some gave a small laugh and then their eyes slicked. A woman around 40 murmured, "So this is the pitch of freedom." Vivian stepped out and tapped a glass. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to witness a woman unapologizing for living." She turned to Maya, "Our artist tonight." Maya looked over the packed faces. "Thank you for coming," she said, not loud. "If there's one thing to take home, let it be this question. Where have I been silent? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, please stand longer before the piece that makes you most uncomfortable." The applause was thick and warm. Then the room fell back into its own respiration. Slower steps, murmurs, breath weaving over breath. Around 8, the door opened again, and the air shifted, faintly, like a change in pressure. Imani nudged Maya. Him. Edward stood on the threshold, dressed all in black, not the glossy black of auction night's matte, like fabric washed many times. His cheeks were hollowed, stubble rough. Thomas stood beside him, hands in pockets, eyes unsteady. They hovered at the entrance like latecomers to a funeral, unsure where to enter. Vivian glanced at Maya. "You okay?" "I'm okay," Maya said. "Let it be." Edward moved through the room without the crowd parting for him like it had in Chelsea. He had to say, "Excuse me," under his breath, wait for an elderly woman to pass. He stopped at Studio Jim, his head tilted. He lifted a hand, then lowered it without touching. He stood so long that Thomas shifted his weight and laid a hand on his shoulder, as if to remind him to breathe. Edward passed a dinner performance. For a second, his face twitched as if a taut string had been tugged. His gaze dropped to the space under the table. The second woman, the real one, shrank like a leaf in cold. He stepped back half a pace. At the question, Edward didn't look at the envelope first. His eyes snagged on the phone screen behind it, the red notifications clumped like moss. He closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, his look had changed. Less defense, more surrender. Finally, he stood before the laugh. Those nearby recognized the scene. The man assigned the role of culprit facing evidence, not legal, but aesthetic. Phones itched to rise, then didn't. No one wanted to fracture the peculiar quiet unfurling in the space. Edward looked up at that laughter. He didn't see himself in the painting Maya had not painted him. Yet the longer he looked, the more his outline dissolved into small details. The ring on the pillow, the unwatered cactus, the shard of mirror reflecting a man reduced to shadow. He reached toward the label, "Not for sale." His finger paused on sale. He drew back as if burned. Maya stepped over not too close, leaving the span of one arm and one lifetime between them. "You came," she said. Edward swallowed. "I had to. I want to understand." "Do you?" He looked at the painting, then at Maya, then back. His lips worked. "I see things I didn't see. And something worse. I see I didn't want to see." Maya nodded without irony. If you truly want to start, start by not buying. She tapped the label. This moment isn't a commodity to redeem yourself with. He nodded faintly, the guard in his eyes lowering. I don't deserve to touch it. He hesitated. I'm in therapy. I know that sounds like PR, but that's your work, Maya cut in gently, calmly. Not mine. Thomas edged closer, voice rough with worry. Maya, Maya turned to him and gave one of the rare smiles she afforded the Sinclairs. Thank you for not blocking my way that night. Thomas's ears flushed. I just didn't want the scene to repeat itself. He nudged Edward. Say what you came to say. Edward drew a breath. I signed. What? The papers. His mouth trembled. Everything you asked. The paintings, the piano. Freedom. I don't want to drag you into another negotiation. Maya looked straight at him, searching for the hidden hook. There wasn't one. She saw only a man who had put down a heavy suitcase and whose hands were still shaking from the weight. Good, she said. Good luck with what's left. A young woman approached, hesitant. Mise, Maya, I'm getting married. I stood in front of dinner performance and I'm scared. Maya turned fully to her, warm. Fear is good. Fear is an alarm. Ask the person you're marrying one question. Do you see me or the role I play? If he hesitates, stand before Studio Jim a little longer. The young woman laughed shakily, eyes shining. Thank you. Edward stepped back and watched as Maya talked, signed catalogues, and hugged someone who'd been crying. For the first time, he saw her as someone at the center of herself, not at the center of his sitting room. Something in him hurt and eased at once, like an old tendon being set back into place. Vivian waved Maya over to the bar. Good news. Dinner performance is placed. The question too. 3 a.m. and Studio Jim have 3 bidders each. But the laugh doesn't sell, Maya reminded her. Of course. Even though someone just whispered a 6-figure number, Vivian flicked her gaze at a silver-haired collector. What should I tell him? Maya sipped water. Tell him if he needs to buy to understand, he won't understand. Naomi Imani slipped in, voice low. Bad news or good? Not sure. There's live TV outside. They want you now. Maya looked out at the cameras waiting. She thought of headlines that would market the private as a product. Then she shook her head. Bring them in here, but no interviews. Film the paintings. And film the people looking. Imani winked. Access manifesto. When the camera drifted over the laugh, Maya stayed out of frame. The lens caught a chain of reactions. An older woman exhaling, a young man biting his lip, a child rising on tiptoe. The presenter stalled a beat, as if forgetting his opener. Then he whispered, as if to himself, stand longer. Near closing, Edward came back to the laugh, one last time. Can I say this without asking for anything? Say it. End section. I don't know what forgiveness island, but I think you did the harder thing. You forgave yourself for staying too long. Maya tilted her head. I don't need to forgive myself. I survived, and now I live. There's no fault between those two verbs. He gave a small, sad smile. That belongs on a wall. It's already there, Maya said, nodding at the largest canvas. In color, later, when Edward and Thomas left, they didn't trail expensive perfume or the hush of car doors. They left a different kind of space. The space made when someone stops trying to control the air. Imani nudged Maya's shoulder. How do you feel? Lighter, Maya said. Like opening a window after rain. Vivian waved a fan of purchase forms. We've nearly sold out. Don't let them buy the story, Maya said. Only the paintings. Vivian winked. Noted on every invoice. Story not for sale. Near the end, a silver-haired woman, elegant but unshowy, stood quietly in a corner. She came to the laugh and took off her glasses. You're Maya? Yes. I'm Margaret. She paused Sinclair. The air gave a slight shiver. Maya saw an old shadow pass in this woman's eyes. Dinners unsaid, sonatas unplayed. Thank you, Margaret said, a faint blend of Italian over English. You did what I didn't when I was your age. You laughed. Maya paused a beat, then nodded without probing. "Thank you for coming." For a long time, Margaret looked at the painting and murmured, "Not for sale, good. Some things, when sold, buy you a new cage." The night closed. The last visitor was a girl on a bicycle, tucking the catalogue into her backpack. "I'll show my mum tomorrow." Vivian locked up, pressed her forehead to the glass, and smiled. "We just did the right thing." Imani bounced, hugging Maya from behind. "Okay, you're famous. Famous or not, it doesn't matter," Maya said. She returned to the empty gallery. The white walls now held breath. On the laugh, the band of color felt warm. "What matters is, I can hear myself." Outside, the rain began soft enough to make the streets shine. Maya pulled her coat and stepped under the awning. Berlin glowed in her mind like a pale star on the horizon, swelling nearer. Behind her, the paintings would sleep in Shoreditch night, but the stories they'd stirred stayed awake. Somewhere, someone was preparing to leave a long table. Somewhere, a man placed his phone face down to hear someone breathe. Here, Maya thanked the rain for not asking for an invitation. "Tomorrow," Imani said, pressing a borrowed umbrella from the faux shop next door into Maya's hand. "Tomorrow," Maya answered, tucking the umbrella under her cheek. She looked at the laugh one last time through the glass. That smile was still open, a door no one could close again. She smiled no chorus of liberation like Chelsea's, but a private low note, enough to set her ribs thrumming once more. Then she walked into the rain, blending into the strip of street with its lights and damp, carrying a new map, galleries, classes, cheap trains, Berlin dawns yet to come. And at every corner she knew that laugh would no longer be a flare. It would simply be a laugh, and that would be enough. Spring came to London like a stubborn dreamer had splashed watercolor over the city map, pale yellow along the parks, blush pink smudged across peach gardens, violet freckles scattered over concrete. The city was loosening, inviting people to lift their heads after the grey winter. Maya woke in the little Brixton flat, early sun slipping through the thin curtains, sketching shimmering triangles on the paint-flaked wall. Beside the bed, a stack of canvases leaned against the plaster, several still wet turpentine, drifting like a familiar perfume. She sat up and pulled back the dust sheet. A sequence of women's faces, nameless, each smiling differently, tender, caustic, bursting, at ease. For now, she was calling the series Smiling to Survive. Her calendar was full now. Mornings teaching kids at the community center hands, mixing color, messy and radiant. Afternoons painting. Evenings out with friends or at other people's shows, a small life, but elastic enough to hold her. That day, Maya took her class to the Brooklyn Museum as a reward for a month of steady color mixing. She led them down the corridor, the children's eyes shining at the massive canvases. Stopping before a work by Kerry James Marshall, she said, "See how the black here isn't a void. It's the presence of every color. Black is full, not lacking." A boy named Marcus looked up. "Miss Maya, is that why you smile even when sad? Because a smile can hold a lot of things at once." She blinked, then laughed. "Maybe you're right. Sometimes laughing and crying live so close they blend." Footsteps sounded behind her. Maya turned, and her heart missed a beat. Edward stood a few meters away, in a pared-down coat, hair longer, and a shave uneven. Beside him was Thomas, an arm lightly across his shoulder, as much escort as brace. Maya didn't avoid him, and she didn't step forward. She only tipped her chin, the nod you give, an old acquaintance you meet on a train platform. Edward nodded back, his gaze softer, no longer evasive. Marcus, blithe, trotted straight up to Edward. "Are you the man who made Miss Maya sad?" The corridor held its breath. Edward crouched to the child's eye level. "Yes," he said quietly, "because I didn't know how to see colors like she does." Marcus blinked. "But she's teaching us. Maybe she could teach you, too." Maya cut in, gentle but firm. "Marcus, back to the group." He obeyed. Edward rose and drew a breath. "You look different, brighter, and you look real," Maya said. "Not a jab, an observation." "I'm trying," he said. "For the first time, trying not to win, just to live like a person." Maya nodded, her eyes keeping their distance. "Good luck. But that road doesn't run parallel to mine." Edward swallowed, then gave a tired smile. I know. But maybe parallel isn't so bad. Even if we never meet, we still share the same universe. Maya didn't answer. She turned back to the children and lifted her hand to gather them. As she left, she caught Thomas patting Edward's shoulder to keep him from collapsing. That night, Maya faced a new canvas and laid the first strokes of parallel. Two bands of color started tangled and knotted, then separated, running side by side, each brightening along its own route. They didn't cross, but they didn't lose each other. She posted a sketch with the caption, "Same song, different dance." Comments poured in from friends and strangers who wrote that they were also learning to turn away from a relationship without letting it swallow their color. Meanwhile, in a small rented flat on the North Bank, Edward sat before his own easel. He'd taped clumsy studies on the wall, shaky, awkward marks. On the table lay Maya's note. Don't try to paint it right. Paint to see yourself. He lifted a brush and drew a wavering arc of blue. Not beautiful, but his. He stopped and let out a small laugh, the sound of someone learning to walk on new legs. In Brixton's night, Maya clicked the canvas closed and stepped onto the balcony. Rap tangled with reggae. Laughter rose from the pub on the corner. She breathed deep. Her lungs felt full, with no room left for counterfeit silence. Parallel. That may be enough. London reigns like a courteous person. Not loud, not aggressive, just dusting everything as if someone took a broad brush and washed a thin coat of water over the city. The date was June 15, the day 2 years earlier, when Maya had stood beneath the dome of St. Paul's, heart beating with the organ, pledging words whose weight she hadn't yet grasped. This year, she hadn't planned to remember. She filled her teaching schedule, made a lunch date with Imani, and promised to treat it like any other day. But the body is its own library. In the morning, her hand trembled slightly as she made coffee. At noon, her eyes lingered longer than necessary on a streak of water on the window. By early afternoon, she folded her travel watercolors into a canvas tote and called Imani with a bare sentence. I'm going for a walk this afternoon. St. Paul's stood there like a question from another century that the modern city still kept, to remind you that some things are heavier than any snap decision. The stone steps were wet. People came and went in twos and threes, most taking shelter beneath the portico. Maya pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the smell of old timber and candle wax rushed out, pressing lightly on her chest like a distant embrace. Inside was vast. The rain sound thinned, replaced by hollow footfalls. Tourists murmured. A few knelt to pray. High on the dais, an elderly cleric stood statue, still, gaze serene. The cathedral breathed to its own rhythm, inhaling through stained glass, exhaling through cold stone. Maya chose the last pew where Imani had sat during the wedding. From here, the aisle to the altar looked like a path of sugared cream leading straight into a volcano's mouth. She took out her travel set, paint box, water brush, heavy paper. The rustle of paper carried a little in the vastness. No one noticed. She sketched a light horizon of the interior, the tall Corinthian columns, the linked domes, the choir's curve, then the first wash cool grey. It ran over the paper like a miniature rain, pulling memories wherever it touched. She painted two figures far off, a bride and groom 5 years gone, only sketched, almost translucent. The dress wasn't white. It was the thinned water of someone not yet ready to say her name. Beside them, she painted rain falling upward from the dome, blurring their faces. The title arrived in her head before the picture was finished. The wedding dissolves. Deep blue for shadow, a pricked gold for candles. A bruised violet hurt you can't see she tucked into the hem of the dress, where most eyes wouldn't look. Then she waited, watching the water find its own path in the paper's grain, spreading, paling, drying. Footsteps slowed behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Some footsteps the body memorizes. Sometimes the heart steps aside before the brain can instruct it. Could you sit on the other side of the aisle? Maya said, eyes on the painting. All right, Edward answered, voice low, not trying to manage the air as he once did. He sat opposite her, across the aisle's strip of polished wood, exactly the distance of vows gone quiet. They sat like two actors arriving early, sound checking on the old stage of a play neither of them wanted to perform anymore. "I didn't expect to see you here," Edward said after a while. "Me neither," Maya answered, dabbing water into a dark corner. "I meant to have lunch and paint by the river, but my hands wanted to paint here. Dr. Cross says there's something called an anniversary response. The body remembers dates, even if you try to forget." "You're listening to your doctor," Maya said, not unkindly. She studied the painting. The rain inside it slid toward the pair, smearing the line between them. "Why did you come?" "To bring you this." His voice tiptoed someone entering a sick room. He set a manila envelope on the pew's edge across from her and nudged it over the aisle like a paper boat across a puddle. "I found these in the attic. The letters you wrote to me in the first year. I read them." Maya set down her brush and looked at the envelope. "As long as you look at an old name carved into a tree. Why bring them here?" "Because I thought, if there's a place to set them down so they don't have to hold anything up anymore, it's here. The place where they were once misread." Maya lifted the envelope. The paper felt heavier than she expected. She opened it and drew out the folded sheets in her slanted hand, the script Edward had once called romantically old-fashioned, before suggesting she switched to email for efficiency. She didn't read every letter. She skimmed a few lines. "You were sleeping when the dawn poured into the kitchen. I wanted to wake you so you could see the yellow pass through the glass, but I was afraid to make you tired. I painted that yellow into my notebook. It looked like my mother's voice singing while she cooked breakfast." Another, "Do you remember the red wall in Brixton where we first kissed? It's been painted grey, but the red remains. I am too. I'm trying to remember my color, in case someone paints over me." Maya folded them and set the envelope back on the pew. Her heart didn't cinch as she'd feared. It opened, like after you've cried long enough. "I sent them, and I waited. Like most women, I'm waiting to be read correctly. It's all right. Now they don't need answers." "That year," Edward said, eyes on the floor, "I wrote a memo about the quarterly report." A dry laugh. "I thought I loved you by providing perfect dinners and chandeliers. I treated marriage like a display window." "And me like a mannequin," Maya said, naming colors. "Not bitter, just accurate." They fell quiet. The rain outside thickened. The church dimmed half a tone. A French tour group drifted past, paused at the altar, raised their cameras, and moved on. Suddenly, street. Paul's was only a beautiful building again, as all beautiful buildings are innocent of the private lives inside them. "I'm selling the company," Edward said abruptly, as if dropping a stone into water to sound its depth. Maya looked up. "Because of Sophia?" "Because of me," he said. "Sophia was only a catalyst. I never wanted to run it. It's my father's legacy, the armor I wore. Now the armor's too heavy, I think. I want to do something with fewer ideas of possession. At a recovery center, learn art therapy. People are laughing at me." "No one laughs at someone learning to walk," Maya said, surprised by the clean feeling the news gave her. "Not if they truly want to walk. I don't know if I've ever loved anyone," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "But I think I can learn to love the thing I'm doing, not to own it." After a moment, Maya closed the sketchbook and lifted the painting to blow it dry. The water settled into thin streams like pleats in memory. She took a pen and added one more detail. A small figure in the corner turned away from the altar, heading for the door. Her shadow didn't trail long. It had folded up, like luggage already packed. "I hadn't meant to come," Maya said. "I was afraid remembering would invite sorrow. It turns out that if you remember it is in the right place, it becomes a streetlight, not a pit." "When do you leave for Berlin?" Edward asked. "Next month." "I'm happy for you." He sounded genuinely glad light, without a hook in it. Maya laughed softly despite herself. "Strange to hear, but thank you. Can I ask the silliest question?" He smiled, creasing at the eyes, and for the first time she noticed wrinkles earned by living, not practiced in a mirror. "Go on." "Oh, if I'd seen you sooner, would things be different?" Maya set the painting down and tilted her head. Questions like that often come in churches, where people imagine a parallel universe in which they choose differently, and all faults are mended. She looked up at the dome where stone angels wheeled on tireless wings. Maybe, she said slowly, or maybe they'd break somewhere else. We were who we were then. The idea of us is beautiful, but ideas don't live well together. Edward nodded, a sheepish smile. Ideas don't cook dinner, or come home to each other after a long day, Maya added, or keep silent at the right time. They're only perfect in a frame. A child's laugh tinkled from a side chapel, a slight sound breaking in an ample space. A young man knelt to pray, shoulders cinched like someone asking permission to breathe. An older woman pulled a handkerchief from her purse, dabbed her eyes, then smiled at herself for crying in public. The church gathered it all: sorrow, faith, confusion, embarrassment, and breathed out calm. I won't apologize anymore, Edward said suddenly. Not because I'm not sorry, but because I understand my apologies have no role in your life's artwork. They're a layer that won't adhere. Right, Maya said. Just as my forgiveness, if it exists, isn't a boarding pass back into my life. Forgiveness is me returning my time to myself, not returning you. Have you forgiven you? He asked. Yes, she answered without hesitation. I've forgiven myself for staying too long, for thinking love meant endurance. I've learned. I graduated. A comfortable quiet settled between them, not the shunning gap, but the space of two people who have set something heavy down and are resting on opposite banks. Maya penned the date in the corner of the painting, 15/6 revision. She held it up once more. The wedding is fading in the rain. The woman is stepping out of the frame. I'll leave a print here, she said suddenly, not to etch my name. Tell some girl sitting in this pew after me that she can rewrite it if she needs to. I think someone will need that, Edward said, looking somewhere ahead. They stood. The pew creaked softly. Maya set the old envelope back on the bench, not abandonment, a letting go. She slid the new painting into her tote. At the door she paused. Edward was still there, hands in pockets, smaller beneath the high vault. But something had shifted. He no longer looked like a statue in the wrong spot. He looked like a person finding the way out. Edward, she called. He looked up. A professional note on painting, she said. A mischievous glint like the girl she'd been in the studio. Don't paint what you think people will praise. Paint what you're afraid they'll see. That's where. The Light Island. He laughed, warm this time, not panicked. Thanks. Homework received. Maya pushed the door. Fresh rain hit her face. She went down the steps, slipped a little, and steadied herself on the cold rail with a hand. Across the road, a red bus rolled past, the passengers swaying like fish in a tank. She pulled up her hood and hugged the painting to her. In her chest, something loosened, an old knot dissolving like sugar in hot tea. Walking through the streets, she stopped at the small print shop near the cathedral, the tourist service kind. She asked them to scan the watercolor and print one copy on heavy stock. When it was dry, she returned it and stepped into street pools again. No one asked. She set the print beside the candle stand where people light one for the living or the dead, anchored it with a paperweight someone had left, and wrote in ink, Year 2, revision complete. She didn't sign her name. When she left for the last time, she didn't look back. She didn't need to stamp the ritual with a glance. The ritual lay in walking away without wobbling. Outside, the rain had eased, the light lay even, and the wet street turned a mirror. She saw herself in the road's reflection. A woman in a hood, canvas tote on her shoulder, a bundle of paper under her arm, walking fast like someone afraid of missing a train, and sure it would come. Crossing Millennium Bridge, the Thames threw metallic damp and riverweed into the wind. A troop of school kids thundered past, laughing, their rain ponchos flapping like wings. Maya smiled. She stopped midway, took a photo of the wedding dissolves held against the grey water, and sent it to Imani with the caption, Revise the manuscript. Imani replied at once, Good. Tonight, noodles, wine, Aretha, dancing in the kitchen. Maya typed back, See you and Aretha in the kitchen. On the other side of the bridge, a busker's guitar rose lazy blues, then suddenly arcing like a bird. She dropped a few coins into his case, nodded, and moved on. Berlin appeared like a far-off neon sign in her mind. Not here yet, but already present. Near dusk, The rain stopped for good, and the sky shook off the damp, leaving a thin belt of silvery blue. Maya opened the flat door to smell turpentine and Imani's noodles. "I'm home," she said. "How's the church?" Imani asked, stirring the pan and softly singing along with Aretha on the Bluetooth speaker. "Cold and warm, like a history lesson taught on the right day," Maya said, hanging her coat, washing her hands, setting the painting on the shelf to dry. He was there too. Imani didn't look up. "And nothing," Maya said, surprised at how easy that truth was. Just a person, no longer a test. They ate noodles and cheap wine, and laughed at small things. Then, faithful to the texts, they turned up Aretha, danced in the kitchen, wooden spoons for microphones, bare feet, sliding over old tile. This laugh wasn't a weapon, manifesto, or flag. It was the sound of survivors who had stepped over the line and were now simply living the verbs separating, no longer crushing each other. That night, before sleep, Maya opened her notebook and wrote 3 lines. "I put one brick of the past back in order today. Forgiving myself is finished work. No certificate required. Tomorrow, buy more cobalt blue." She turned out the light. In the dark, night rain returned soft, as a thank you note never sent. Somewhere under Street Paul's dome, the print of the wedding dissolves lay still, waiting for another pair of eyes. On the riverbank, the bridge took the wind. In Brixton, the girl had revised the manuscript of her story and was dreaming a dream with no crystal, only color. Wednesday night, the Riverside Community Center glowed like a ship moored on the edge of the street, its windows throwing warm yellow light. Maya had just wrapped her adult painting class hands, more used to keyboards, brooms, or steering wheels now clumsy with brushes, yet spilling strokes so honest it hurt to look at. She was packing up her paint box when salsa burst from the next room, thick as a downpour. Conga drums, the tick of the clave, brass soaring. Maya smiled. The dance class's music bled through the wall weakly, and her students painted to the beat without meaning. The door flew open. Magdalena, the salsa teacher, with a petite frame and red dress like a smear of fire, planted her hands on her hips. "Maya, mi amor, save me. My assistant broke his leg trying to prove you can spin 3 times in a row. Result, broken leg, flattened ego. I need you tonight." Maya laughed. "Magda, I haven't danced in 10 years. I only paint. Painting is dancing different tools. Come, just for one night. You still remember the basics. Salsa isn't math. Salsa is conversation with the body." Maya hesitated, but Magdalena had already caught her hand. "Vamos." The studio was packed. Neon fell onto a wood floor that was worn smoothly. Students of every kind, office workers, grandmothers, students, the newly divorced, looking for their heartbeat. The music swelled. Magdalena called out, "Remember, there's no leader and follower, only the one who proposes and the one who interprets. Salsa is dialogue. Don't force, listen." Maya took the front, meaning to help demo a few steps. Then her eyes caught a face in the back row, and her breath snagged half a beat. Edward. The grey t-shirt has creased chinos and sweat beading in the heat. He glanced around, plainly trying to steady himself in the crowd. Their eyes met. Instead of flinching away, Maya gave the slightest nod. Edward nodded back, awkward as a beginner, learning a new move. "Change partners," Magdalena called. Fate smirked. Maya turned, and Edward was standing across from her, only an arm's length between them. He held out his hand, uncertain. Maya set hers in it, not avoiding. Strange, familiar, and different at once. His hand no longer smelled of expensive cologne, only clean sweat. "I didn't know you were here," Edward said quietly. "Me neither," Maya said. "Why salsa?" "The doctor says I need something I can't control, something that makes me listen." He shrugged. "Gabriel suggested it. Maybe on purpose." Maya huffed a laugh. "At least salsa's cheaper than group therapy." "Uno, dos, tres, cinco, seis, siete," Magda counted. Music wrapped around them. At first, Edward led stiffly, clumsily. Maya let him fumble, then murmured, "Don't think the steps, hear the music." He nodded, breathed in, loosened. The movement slowed, turned natural. Maya felt herself shift with the rhythm, no longer bracing. Just a dance, no more, no less. Magda circled, clapping. Yes, lighter. Propose. Don't command. Give the other person space to breathe. Edward glanced at Maya. Strict teacher. Better than an unemployed CEO trying to spin people at a meeting. They laughed simultaneously, a laugh without bite or strain. The quick reflex when two people trip and notice together. The tempo jumped. Edward missed and stepped on Maya's foot. She winced. Sorry, he panted. It's fine. Just don't make it a habit. He nodded, adjusted. This time, he stepped back half a beat, raised his hand as if asking, May I? Maya nodded. He turned her lightly, no yank, no press. For the first time, Maya danced with Edward without feeling herself erased. Applause at the end of the song. Change partners. Maya left Edward and danced with a man in his 60s, stiff legs, bright eyes, who said he'd promised his late wife he'd learn salsa. Edward moved to a young woman who teased him for dancing like a robot, but Maya saw him laugh real, not for show. Another rotation, and they met again. Sweat darkened Edward's collar, his face flushed. I didn't come to find you, he said softly, but maybe the universe wants us to learn this. Share the same music, keep our own rhythm. Maya tilted her head. Maybe. Same song, different dance. Class ended. Students drifted out. Maya grabbed her tote. Edward stepped over. He didn't touch her. He only said, I won't ask you to come back. I know it's too late for that, but thank you for the one dance. It taught me more than a year as CEO. Maya smiled a little. Your tuition. One step back. When you feel control rising, give away half a beat. He nodded. I will. Magda slipped between them, eyeing Edward and then Maya, smiling slyly. That man looks at you like you're a painting he doesn't yet understand. At least now he'll stand in front of it longer. Maya didn't answer. She looked at the street. Streetlights shining in puddles, taxis sliding past, salsa still tapping in the air like a pulse. She exhaled. No more pain, only rhythm. That night, back at the flat, Maya reached for her brushes. She painted two shadowed figures, her back turned, and her feet moved to the same music. Between them is a band of space. Beneath them is a ground of color in steady waves. Title, Parallel in Motion. She posted a photo without a caption. Minutes later, Edward's account left a comment. Same song, different dance. Maya didn't reply, but this time, she didn't delete it either. Brixton's night settled sporadic cars, damp brick in the air. Maya closed her sketchbook and thought, maybe this is the final lesson to learn how to exist inside the same song while each keeps a different dance. Strangely, that, too, is a kind of harmony. The card was as stiff as a lie printed on luxury stock. Cream cover, gold-stamped letters, Marlowe and Sinclair. Liquidation Gala, a new chapter. Beneath the title, a phony quotation. Every ending is a beginning. Sender, Claudia Marlowe's PR firm. Venue, the Chelsea mansion where Maya first laughed like a survivor. Date, on her 29th birthday. Imani held the card up to the kitchen light. Who invites you to the funeral of the war that once kept you trapped? Maya poured mint tea and dropped in a slice of lemon. Someone who doesn't know funerals are for quiet. Claudia always needs lights. She flipped the card to the fine print. Dress code, black tie and red accent. She laughed. Red, the color Claudia uses to sticker herself onto every story. Are you going? Imani asked, slowly. I am, Maya said, surprised by the firm brace rising. Not to watch her fall, to watch myself stand straight in the place that once forced me to bow. Imani arched a brow. Then what do you wear? Maya opened her little closet, mostly jeans, linen shirts, cotton dresses. She stopped at a saffron silk dress, light as late afternoon Sunday. This color doesn't ask permission, she said. It won't follow anyone's dress code. Chelsea that night blazed like a stage with the dimmer stuck on high. A white marquee was pitched over the back garden, and fairy lights poured like rain. Servers in black moved in ranks, carrying champagne and finger foods like edible press releases. A string quartet rushed through Vivaldi, as if every season required the same tempo. Maya stood at the edge of the portico and breathed deeply. The air here smelled of white tea and fear. She stepped in, her heels counting time for her. Each click was a word in the sentence. "I do not belong here anymore. Mrs. Sinclair." A flustered PR voice swooped in, then startled itself into correction. "Ah, sorry, Miss Maya Sinclair, the artist. So honored. Just call me Maya," she said, gently. The woman backed off and scribbled something on her iPad as if logging a development. In the great hall where she'd once been slapped, Claudia appeared on the staircase like a woman determined to convince the room that gravity was for other people. Red dress, of course, red lips, red nails. But this time the red wasn't marquee bright. It was sharp, thin, taut as a nerve. Her body was lean, cheekbones cut. Behind the smile was the stretched film of bubble wrap around something fragile. "Welcome," Claudia called bright and ringing. "Tonight we celebrate freedom." She paused and faced the chandelier as if praying to diamonds. Freedom from a rotten empire. Polite, off-season applause, like a stray shower. Former shareholders glanced at one another. A few journalists raised their cameras. Maya watched. Claudia stepped down, each tread an exclamation point. "Prater, Sinclair Industries," she corrected, lowering her voice, "is finished. We will sell everything." Her eyes swept the room like a blade. This house, the paintings, the antiques, call it a cleansing. Maya looked around. The abstracts Edward had bought were stickered with auction lot numbers. A sign on the grand piano read Lot 47. Every object wore a starting price, as if numbers were its only value. "And before we begin," Claudia said, smiling like someone who'd pumped more air into her ego, "we must thank the person who gave us the right shove." She turned. Her gaze found Maya with the inevitability of an arrow to a marked target. "Maya, darling, join me." A cold ripple ran down the crowd's spine. Someone murmured, "More theater." Imani, posted by the rear doors, squeezed Maya's hand for a beat. Maya slipped free, smiled, and walked toward the steps. She wasn't running from this stage anymore. The stage had no rights over her. She carried her own gaze the way one holds a lamp. She stopped on the third step, not shoulder to shoulder with Claudia. The gap between them was precisely the length of a slap, the distance she would never again surrender. Claudia cocked her head, smile slick. "You're still choosing gold, I see." "Because it belongs to light," Maya said, "not to blood." For a beat, Claudia's smile twitched. She recovered quickly, voice bright enough to crack a mirror. "Maya is the woman who laughed after being struck. She made the whole city ask questions." Claudia turned to the room. "Applause, please, for a woman who uses laughter as a weapon." The clapping came patchy, uneven. Maya waited for it to fall. "Laughter isn't a weapon," she said. "Not loud, but rounded. It's a language." Claudia blinked off tempo. "A language for what?" "To say no to a cage," Maya answered. "And yes to myself." A middle-aged woman drew a breath. Someone murmured assent. Someone else chuckled how you do when a line lands on the beat. Claudia pressed on. She dropped one more step, standing level with Maya. "And tonight," she said in a confiding hush, "are you here to laugh again? Over the Sinclair's ashes?" "No," Maya said. "I'm here to put a proper period on my sentence. Whoever lit the match knows whose ashes these are." A soft grunt from somewhere, agreement, or surprise. Claudia's gaze swung like a scale, measuring effect. She lifted her chin. "Fine. We are all free women. I differ from you only in that I know what it is to win." "Your victory is hijacking a sinking ship and throwing a gala on deck," Maya said, cool as water. "Mine is swimming to shore." A ripple of laughter rose rare in rooms like this. It didn't define anyone. It just released air. Claudia looked around and felt the atmosphere slip from her grasp like an afternoon shadow. She dug her nails into the rail, red tips biting wood. "Very well," Claudia said, shifting tactics. "Let's raise a glass to new beginnings." She lifted hers. "To freedom from toxic male legacies." A few glasses rose. Maya didn't lift one. "Freedom isn't from men," she said, adjusting the phrasing. "It's from irresponsible power. That power can wear a suit, It can also wear a red dress. The room hummed like a plucked string. Some people looked down at their shoes. Some looked up at the lights. Claudia kept smiling, but her lips began to tremble. She leaned forward as if to flick a razor line. Maya lifted a hand to draw an invisible stroke in the air, like a painter laying composition, not to stop her. "You're not my opponent, Claudia," Maya said in the same even tone. "I don't want a tug of war with a rope built to bind us together. I came here to leave upright." Imani's mouth tilted, like someone watching a friend slip the pin at just the right spot. In a corner, a silver-haired woman, Margaret Sinclair, raised her glass quietly, eyes fixed on Maya. When their gazes touched, Margaret dipped the slightest nod. "Enough," her eyes said. At that exact moment, sirens sounded far away, irrelevant, but sharp enough to clip a taut nerve. The air sagged. Claudia inhaled, then laughed a hollow tube. "Fine, celebrate as you wish." She spun and strode down the stairs, her red silk trailing like a torn kite tail. Maya stayed on the third step a breath longer, looking at the room. The place that had once turned her volume down was now a sheet of paper overwritten until the ink pooled black. She stepped down and walked through the faces that had once been her wall. Miss Maya, a young reporter, edged up, a mic cupped in her palm. One quote. "Let my paintings answer," Maya smiled. "Tonight I'm not a slogan." She crossed the room. Imani slipped in beside her like a patch of shade arriving on time. "Chapter closed," Imani said. "Yeah," Maya said. "Berlin chapter next. Want to stay and watch them auction the long dining table?" "No," Maya shook her head. "I hate it when objects that know my secrets get shouted at for bids." They went into the garden. The night was cool and smelled of wet leaves. At the edge of the lawn, a young woman was on the phone, voice shaking. "Mum, I'm not getting married next month. I think I get it now." Maya walked past, didn't linger, but a small candle lit inside her. "Did you see Edward?" Imani asked, as if remembering. Maya shook her head. No need to. But as they rounded the flagstone path to the side gate, Edward stood there, leaned against a pillar, hands in the pockets of a dark coat. No tux, no tie, no security. Just a man at the rim of the story, unwilling to step in. "Happy birthday," Edward said, low, no hand extended, no performative fix. "I heard from Imani," whispered. "Thank you," Maya said, smiling. She didn't ask why he was here or hadn't gone in. They were no longer each other's questions. "I'm learning to teach drawing to veterans at a center," Edward said, like reporting the weather. "They paint what they can't say." One man drew only black lines. Last week, he added a yellow dot. "That's the sky short-circuiting," Maya teased, then sobered. "I'm glad for them, and for you." He nodded, gratitude that needed no words. "I won't go in. Tonight isn't mine. I just wanted to stand here, so that when you leave this place again, you know there's someone who won't pull you back." "No one can pull me back anymore," Maya said, not proud, just stating a verified fact. "But thank you for not trying." Imani gave a discreet cough. "Taxi's waiting." Maya nodded to Edward. "Goodbye, Edward. Smooth flights," he said. "And may Berlin be generous with dawns." She turned and walked. She didn't look back. The side gate opened with the genteel creak of an old aristocrat and closed as softly as a final secret being set down. Late at night, Brixton was warm as an open kitchen. Maya and Imani sat at the table. Between them lay the print of The Wedding Dissolves. Maya had scanned, and an emailed ticket to Berlin. Imani poured wine from a cheap bottle, the one they joked was poor girl Pinot Grigio. "To 29, Imani said, lifting her glass. "To 29, Maya tapped hers, listening to glass meet glass, an ordinary and sacred sound. "To not needing a crystal to confirm we're still breathing." "To Berlin," Imani added. "To Berlin," Maya echoed. "And to Barcelona." She thought of Margaret, the woman who had left a velvet-wrapped life to relearn laughter in the Sunday. "I'll visit her. I'll bring inheritance." Imani propped her chin on her hand, looking at Maya like a map with its route inked in. "Are you ready?" Maya thought of the small suitcase, the paint box, the sheets of paper, the Berlin trams. German-like blocks building a house in the throat, the new studio smell of unfamiliar paint, the friends not yet named, the midnight FaceTimes with Imani, the paintings not yet shaped. "Ready," she said. "I've been ready since the night I laughed." It took a year to believe in myself. Her phone buzzed. A message popped up from a number now saved under a new name. Edward. Heard someone reset the rules tonight. Happy birthday. May Berlin be kind. Thank you for letting me learn. Maya read it and then deleted it, not because of anger but because endings need space. She looked at Imani and smiled. "Tomorrow at the airport, remind me to bring cobalt blue." "I will," Imani said. "And the low heels. Berlin's bridges are lumpy stone." They laughed. The laugh didn't seek allies or invite an audience. It went out the window and joined the night wind. The next morning, London gave a rare day. A sky thin and blue as silk. At the airport, Maya rolled her suitcase and tucked a tube of drawings under one arm. Her chest of light was like someone who'd cleared the secret compartments of a house. She and Imani hugged at security, the hug of two women who know life is a chain of arrivals and departures, and friendship is the hidden stitching. "Send me the first sunrise," Imani said. "I will," Maya promised. "And if I find a Berlin dish you can make in your dented pan, I'll learn it." They laughed again. Imani returned and flashed a V. "Victory but yours." Maya moved with the stream of people. The edge of her boarding pass rasped her fingertip. On the big screen, her name flickered past, becoming a single bright dot in the day's flight chart. By the window, the plane taxied. Maya watched London shrink. Grey roofs lined up like a scale. The river curled into a clef. The Chelsea mansion was only a rest note if it made the frame. She leaned her forehead to the glass, shut her eyes for a heartbeat before takeoff, and heard her laughter from that far night like an overture. No longer a fire alarm. An opening theme for the new act. The nose lifted. The sky opened. Maya rested her hand on the tube of drawings. In her mind, cobalt blue poured down onto Berlin's unstrung canvas. She smiled a quiet, unproving smile and whispered, just for herself, "Happy birthday again."